Good evening, booktubers. This is Patrick Campion. I am back again on my channel, Beg, Steal, or Borrow Books. And today I'm excited to do my very first book review on a historical fiction novel. This novel is A Darker Sea, Master Commandant Putnam and the War of 1812 by James L. Haley. It's number 2 in a what I would figure will be a continuing series of the American naval officer Blyven Putnam. The first book in the series is called The Shores of Tripoli, Lieutenant Putnam and the Barbary Pirates, which I've read already. A good read, and that's where we meet our main character, Blyven Putnam of Litchfield, Connecticut, who grows up on his family farm with his mother and father. He is the grandson of the Revolutionary War hero, Major General Israel Putnam, who is a historic figure. He was one of the top 3 generals that were made at the same time that General George Washington was made the overall commander of the Continental Forces in 1775. So this is the fictional character, his descendant, grandson, Blyven Putnam, who lives in Litchfield, Connecticut. In the first story, the Barbary Pirates, he was a lieutenant. He met his friend there, who was a Southerner. He's one of, well, he's one of these guys. Not a guy who cooks fried chicken, but a Southern gentleman. And they meet on a ship in the Mediterranean fighting the Barbary pirates, and they were both lieutenants. Flash forward, that's 1803. This is 1811, where we begin in the book. And Lieutenant Putnam is on leave with his new wife. They live in the home with Blyven's parents, and he's pretty well satisfied with life. He's a half-pay officer in the U.S. Navy, which is what they did when they put you on furlough and they didn't need you for the time being. But before long, some trouble arises on the high seas as the British are embroiled in a continental war in Europe against the forces of Napoleon and France, as well as Spain for a time. So they have a very large British Royal Navy, at the time over 500 warships, and all the attendant ships that help keep that warship supplied, with over about 150,000 sailors that they needed at all times to keep their ships manned. Now, England was a fairly large country, but keeping 150,000 men employed as sailors on the high seas, being away from home for literally years at a time, was very difficult, and in very bad conditions, food, bad water, diseases that would spread throughout ships. So it was very hard to get people to man the ships. So the British came up with the idea of stopping neutral shipping. In this case, they're at war with France and Spain. They were not at war with America, so they stopped American shipping, and they would purport to find deserters from the British Royal Navy, press them into service on the British ships, expecting that America would do nothing about it, and they would be able to continue to have manpower to fight the war against Napoleon. The story takes place, obviously, in 1811, as this is building up to a head, and the president at the time, James Madison, decides that America's had enough insults from the British, and that he declares war in June of 1812 against England. Some people call this the Second War of Independence. America fought against the British. So we go to our hero, our main character, our Blyven Putnam, who gets recalled to duty in the U.S. Navy and is given his first independent command, a 20-gun brig called the Tempest. And he has to leave his comfy home and his new wife and his friends and family and go back out to sea to defend his country. His best friend, Sam Bandy, the Colonel Sanders guy, he winds up being a merchant captain. He decides to leave the Navy, and he has his own ship that he's a partner in. And his ship gets stopped at sea by a British frigate, and he, of course, winds up being pressed into service by the very vengeful and mean Captain Lord Kington, who presses him into service, regardless that he knows that he's not the actual deserter that he claims him to be. So now we have our hero, Blyven Putnam, going out to sea in his 20-gun brig, and his best friend, Sam Bandy, captured by the British and pressed into service. Now, the story has great action sequences. Battle at sea in literature is really, I won't say it's acquired taste, because you've seen enough films that you know what it looks like. And so even if you don't know the nautical terms, if you don't know the ropes, as they say in Navy parlance, in the age of sail back in those days, if you didn't know the ropes, you still get a sense of what's going on. The author, James Haley, does a good job of getting you submersed in that atmosphere, so that you don't feel like they're saying things and you don't know what the hell they're talking about. You can see it in your mind, and that's a good job. From reading the first novel to this novel, the author has definitely improved on his storytelling and his descriptive voice, and it really gives more life to the characters. I enjoyed the first book, and I'll probably do a review of that one day. This does stand by itself. You can certainly read this one alone. But the author does a better job of getting that across and giving his characters real unique voice. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of this. Of course, like I said, the Royal Navy had over 500 warships at the time, and the Americans declaring war on Britain and basically going to fight a sea war was pretty crazy, because the British did have over 150,000 sailors and Marines. And at the time, the U.S., against the 500 ships of the British, had 16 ships. 9 of those were frigates, and the rest of them were smaller than frigates, which in the parlance of the age of sail would have been ships that had guns in the range of 32 guns to 44, or even as many as 48 guns on board. And so we were very undermanned and undergunned, but we used that smaller ships to our advantage with hit-and-run tactics, kind of like guerrilla warfare in the high seas, and we were very successful against the British. What's good about this novel is that we all know all of the very famous British sea captains and admirals that have come up throughout history that you may or may not have heard of, but there's so many novels about the British Royal Navy, and that this takes on and builds a series of novels around an American naval hero is fairly unique. There's only a few books, a few series that actually touch on the American naval history. I mean, just look at all the British naval people that you know. Here, there's a quick look. Look at all those guys. All right, maybe the last couple people are not, maybe they didn't actually serve in the British Royal Navy. Maybe they weren't even real people. But you get my point. And my point is that this is good that somebody's elevating some of our American naval personnel as the heroes that they were in defending and to carving out our great country. Anyway, there's some subplots going on in this novel. Some of them on a con, some of them are a little bit slow. His wife is at home in Litchfield, Connecticut, and Litchfield may sound familiar to some of you if you're really into history. This is where a very famous Reverend, Lyman Beecher, had his congregation for about somewhere in the order of 15 to 20 years. And the author makes them come into contact with Blyven Putnam's family and his wife starts working with the church while Blyven's gone, for how long she never knows, of course. And the Reverend Lyman Beecher has a wife and family, and Constance, Blyven Putnam's wife, befriends the 4-year-old daughter by the name of Harriet Beecher, who will grow up to be Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course the author of the earth-shattering novel Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1800s. That was, a rallying point for the abolitionist movement in the lead up to the Civil War. So very interesting that the author ties that into the storyline. I will admit those parts of the story are a bit slow, especially compared to broadsides of cannon being fired, on rolling seas in battle. But if it lays the groundwork for a future novel, which I believe it probably is, then it's worth going down that road. And just for the Harriet Beecher Stowe connection is worth the read. So some of that also has a lot of religious fervor involved, a lot of abolitionist preachiness. So if that's something that really turns you off, maybe skim through those parts of the novel and don't let it get to you. So on my rating scale of Beg, Borrow, and Steal, I'm going to say for the darker sea, this would definitely be a borrow this book and give it a read. It's very unique in that it has an American naval hero. It's well written. Action sequences are really good. Subplots can use a little work. I look forward to the next novel from James Haley. If you're interested in the Age of Sail and you're interested in naval warfare, there are some great series out there if you haven't read them yet. Of course, you may be familiar with the C.S. Forrester series of Horatio Hornblower. We all know that's turned into a very successful TV series at one point. And of course, the Russell Crowe made the Master and Commander series very famous by playing the Captain Jack Aubrey character of that series name. There's 21 novels in that series, so you can really dig into the Age of Sail. But this is a good primer if you want to get started and you want to show your American pride. Check out A Darker Sea by James L. Haley. All right, folks, I'm going to catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.